Hello and welcome to this video where we will be unboxing and doing the full setup of the MAG-6000 Hedge Trimmer blade sharpener. Let's get started. First, I have the first of two boxes already open. Here you can see we have the tabletop, the large galvanized tabletop of the Hedge Trimmer sharpener. You can set this aside. And we'll move this packaging out of the way. Now we have the main box. When you open it up, there will be a piece of cardboard on the top covering it. If you purchased your machine as a system and you got a dust collector with it, there will be a 3-foot piece of hose inside, and it's 4-inch diameter. You will find one belt packaged by itself. This is a 120 grit belt. It is an extra belt. We'll talk about that later. You'll find an envelope with the instructions. There will be a white box with the LED task light for the unit. And then there will be a parts box with the other components in to assemble the tabletop you first saw onto the machine itself. Now, for taking the machine out of the main box, it is bolted to a piece of OSB, and we also have a liner in the box. So you first need to remove the liner, or it will be difficult to lift the machine out of the box. The machine itself, without the tabletop on it as you're lifting it out here, is a little over 60 pounds. Now that we have everything out of the main boxes, let's go through all of the parts and unpack the smaller boxes so that we make sure we have everything laid out to be ready for the assembly. We can first take the bag off the unit. And of course, do inspect for any possible shipping damage and let us know right away at Magna-Matic.com. Give us a call at 800-328-1110 so that we can remedy it right away. So here's the base body of the machine. Again, we mentioned we had that hose if you got a system with a dust collector. The large galvanized tabletop is here. That 120 grit belt, which is an extra belt if you want a finer finish on your blades. The machine comes with a 100 grit belt already installed, and that we find has a good finish and removes material quickly for a faster sharpening job. If you really want a nice crisp edge, you can always put on the 120 grit belt and then touch all the teeth again to give them even a nicer finish. That's what that is for. So here we have our instruction sheet. The light will just show you what that looks like here. We'll be doing that install, part of the install, a little bit later. So the light is inside here. But what I want to focus on are the parts in this box because we'll be using them next. In here you'll find two support brackets with the associated hardware sectioned off by size. The 3 steel bars in here are the blade fences that will give you your guidance when sharpening, and there's also a T-handle T15 torx wrench packaged along with the unit. 6 knobs for the fences. And then in the foam here, we have the side cover that is currently exposed here, because when we're installing the tabletop to the unit, not having this on gives us access to installing first the short brackets, then the longer brackets, and lastly the tabletops which we'll go through next. The first step we'll have to do is take the OSB, or the piece of wood, off of the bottom of the machine. Now for the removal of the OSB from the machine itself, you will need two 7/16 wrenches. For this first one, you can actually place the wrench underneath to be able to loosen this nut. There are two bolts holding the wood onto the machine. The second one is underneath the motor. You can take your cardboard sheet that you had from the packaging to tip the unit on its side gently. This will allow you access underneath the motor and to the bottom of the unit. And now we can set the machine upright again. Now we have the OSB off, and just so you're aware, if any of this hardware that was holding the OSB was damaged in transit, or if the OSB was damaged in transit, that's just fine. It was meant to take the brunt of any drops or falls. We don't need that hardware, and we don't need the piece of wood again. At this point in the setup, if you have also purchased one of our pedestal stands or a dust collector, please get the stand built before you move on from this point. We are going to next mount the machine body itself to the pedestal stand before we start building the tabletop. Now, if you don't have a pedestal stand, obviously you can have it on a normal workbench, and you can continue the steps further. Now we're ready to place the machine body onto the pedestal stand. Pay attention to, if you have a dust collector, which side you put the brackets on. The brackets will be on this side of the unit. The dust collector hangs over here for access for the hose to get to it. So make sure which orientation or which side you put the hanging brackets on. Check the manual. And of course, the rubber feet stay on the machine when placing it on the pedestal stand. In your stand hardware, you'll find 2 1.5-inch bolts that are 1/4 inch thread and 2 1/4 inch nuts. You'll need 7/16 wrenches again to bolt the machine body to the stand. Here's a close-up view of the mounting hole. It is relatively close to the motor pulley. We recommend that you come up from the bottom. And when tightening these, we're only looking to lightly compress the rubber feet. You don't want to crush them and totally mushroom them, just a little bit of compression on the rubber feet. Now we have the motor side of the machine, the same process here, and the other bolt hole is essentially across from it, from the original one you did. Again, come up from the bottom. This one is under the motor, so you'll want to come up from the bottom with that bolt, and you can hold the nut with a finger to get it started, and then once you have it started, you can hold it while you're tightening the bottom one. The next step is taking these long support rails off of the tabletop. We installed them at the factory to give this part more strength during shipping, so that there would be less likelihood of any shipping damage. But it is far easier if we take them off when installing them onto the machine. So what you'll need is to open up the package with the fences inside of them, those long bars, because inside there you'll find the T15 torx wrench that we supplied. You will need an 11/32 open-ended wrench or socket. So you'll notice the tabletop is in 2 pieces. You'll see a seam. There's a smaller portion and then a longer L-shaped portion. We can turn it over. The smaller portion here go into threaded holes, so you do not need the wrench. And these are very short screws, they're only about 1/4 inch long, so be careful and not to lose them. So here's that smaller portion of the tabletop. This is a removable portion because this allows you access to be able to change belts. Now we'll need our wrench, and we'll take out all the other screws, removing the 2 long support rails from the table. Now we can install the short brackets that are part of the table support. So you'll want to cut those open out of the bag, and I'll show you the part. There are 2 of them. One goes up front here, and the second one will go back behind the electrical box where the switches are. They are identical parts, so you can't mix them up. Also open up all the 1/4 inch hardware that you have in your bag, because we'll use that next for these brackets. Now, something to be noted, the nuts we provide you are referred to as distorted nuts or distorted lock nuts. They have a dimple stamped into them. This will make them, when you get to tightening them, they'll be difficult to tighten. Similar to like a nylon insert nut, they are locking. This way a lock washer is not required and Loctite is not required. You'll see these are the 2 holes we'll be mounting the bracket to. Take the bolt and put it on the inside of the machine. Then you'll have to hold the bracket there and get the nut started. Then we can take the other bolt and when we tighten these, it's very critical. We're not going to torque them fully tight. We're going to get them close, but so they're still a little bit loose. You'll need 2 7/16 wrenches. So now here you can see we still have this bracket loose. We want to install the small bracket in the front here and the back, along with both of the long rails, all loose, to ensure that they can float a little bit to find that best flatness for the overall table. So it's very critical, if you catch anything out of this video, leave these brackets loose until we're at the end with the table on top. Then we'll go through and torque them all later. Now we're installing the second small bracket. It's just like the first one. Now we'll get these 2 close to tight, but again, not torquing them fully. Next we'll be doing the long rails. Again, just like the small brackets, these long rails are an identical part. So you can't really choose the wrong side or anything. There isn't a left and a right. Okay, now for the long rails. You'll notice on the rail, one angle will have threaded holes and one will not. What you need to do is line up the 2 1/4 inch holes to the 2 1/4 inch holes on the small brackets. You will bias more of the table out towards this side, opposite of the electrical box. There's less table over by the electrical box. Okay, we'll start on the electrical box side. You can start by putting the bolt through and then get the nut started, and then you can let that hang. We can go to the other side. Again, just like the small brackets, we're going to get them tight but not torqued to the end. We want to keep all these brackets loose. Okay, and it's essentially the same process on this side. Again, we'll start here back here by the electrical box. Now we can even let that rest on the motor. Remember, having those just a little bit loose, everything can float now. Our next step is installing the large tabletop, but I want to draw your attention to a number of these notches and cutouts here in the tabletop. They are going to go around a number of these shapes here with the electrical box and this belt guard. It's a little safety guard there. So when you fit that in, you will have to guide and line up those notches. Let's give you a closer view of how that fits in. Now we're ready to bring our large tabletop in, and as I mentioned before, these notches and cutouts have to be aligned, and you also have to get the outer lip over the bracket in the back and near the belt in the front. So it's not difficult, but just start by sliding in there to start. Now you can see we've got this notch that fits here, and just gently slip that in place, and you'll see how it fits under. You then can also look at where the holes start lining up in the long rails. Okay, now that we have the tabletop in place, we are ready to put some of the hardware in. We are going to be using the Torx screws that are a 1/2 inch long with the nylon insert nuts. You will need the supplied T15 Torx wrench, as well as an 11/32 wrench or socket. Now, the large tabletop has all through holes where you will need a nut. The nut is, of course, on the underside. All the holes are chamfered, so of course that this hardware sits flush when your hedge trimmer blade rides over the top of it. So again, because of all the brackets being loose, so it's easier to line things up, you'll start lining those up, and you can drop screws into each one of the holes. So just as a quick review, we had 2 back here by the electrical box. There are 2 more here, kind of in line with the belt. There are 2 out at the end, and there are 2 more on the back side out of your view currently that essentially match up to here on the other side of the belt. Those are the 8 screws holding the tabletop down. Okay, let's get some of these nuts started. Next, we'll be installing the smaller or removable tabletop. So one difference from the large tabletop to where the small tabletop goes is that the small tabletop, because it is removable for accessing the belt during a belt change, these holes are all tapped so there isn't a nut going through, so it's very easy and fast to remove when you want to change a belt. So let's bring the table over, and again there are a number of notches and slots that you want to line up. And look at where the holes line up. Then you'll take those very short 1/4 inch Torx and start to screw them in, but again leave them just a little bit loose. Now in the package you'll notice we give you a couple extra of these little short 1/4 inch screws in case you happen to lose them, because again you'll be taking those in and out anytime you have a belt change. This is a view from under the tabletop. You'll see we have an outlet here. This outlet is switched by the blue switch cover. It is intended for plugging in the dust collector, so you can easily turn it on from the 2 switches up on top of the MAG-6000. Now you'll notice there's a hole right here. This hole helps secure the tabletop. You will need a 5/16 socket along with one of the sheet metal screws included, and we won't put that screw in. But like the other ones, please leave that loose at this time. Now that we have all of the brackets installed, the tabletop is all installed with all of the screws loosely placed in every hole, we are ready to start torquing everything down. And the order that we do this is important. We're going to start with the large tabletop and all of the Torx screws and their respective nuts tightening that down first. Then we'll tighten the small tabletop, and then we'll move underneath and tighten all the 1/4 inch hardware of all the brackets, the short and long brackets. And now all of the torques are tight, and it's this smoothness across here, this seam, that we want to make sure is in line, and that's why we did all of this, leaving it floating. Now, we've got one sheet metal screw to put in from the bottom here to secure the tabletop yet before we move on to the brackets. So again, that's 5/16. We can move on to all the 1/4 inch hardware where we will need 2 7/16 wrenches. Now the long brackets are secured. Now we'll torque the short brackets. Now the assembly of the tabletop is complete. Now we're able to install the pulley cover for the MAG-6000. This part goes behind the long support rail, so it hinges in from the top and then the bottom swings in. And it will be a snug fit. And then once you have that all in line and it's flush, you'll need some of these sheet metal screws. We have our 5/16 driver again for the sheet metal screws, and there will be 5 of them. The first one is up in the center, one in this lower corner, then directly above it, one that goes through the small zinc plated bracket. That repeats on this side. And now the pulley safety cover is in place. This circular cover here we would remove when installing an inlet for the dust collector. The next component we're going to install is the task light. Now once you've unpacked the task light, there is a nut on the end here that you'll want to unscrew and take off. We can set that in front here. We'll set the light aside and then get you a little bit closer view on opening up the electrical box and doing the wiring. The first thing we need to do is remove the 3 screws that are holding on the electrical box. You'll find 3 junction boxes inside, one for all the black wires, one for all the green ground wires, and one for all the white wires. These little junction boxes have levers that lift up and are spring-loaded to hold and clamp the wires inside. So we can open up all the levers for the open slots for each color. We'll make a little room here, and then we'll get the light and install it in the open hole. Here's the tail of the light. You'll need to bring these wires down through the hole in the top. And then keep them together. You'll need to take this nut and bring it up through the wires. To get to the underside of the light. Generally you can get this started with 2 fingers. And there we've got it started. To tighten the light, you'll need a 3/4 wrench on the top and a 7/8 inside. And we'll snug that, so that's tight. Now we can make all the electrical connections into the junction boxes. We'll start with the white wire here. And then do give it a little tug, make sure that it's secure. Here's the green wire into the green junction box. Oh, you can see there I did not have it deep enough. And now that one is secure. Lastly, the black. Now all of them are secure again. We can tuck all the wires gently back into the electrical box. Make sure all the wires are behind the lips so that you don't pinch a wire with the cover. Now, since we completed the installation of the light, let's quick test the light. And the switch was already on, so the light is functioning. You have a rotary switch here at the hood to turn the light on and off. Now, at this time, we could also check to see and test the MAG-6000 itself, because we've got the table in place, we've got the guarding in place. The first thing is to open up the top cover and just inspect the belt. You always want to just give a quick push to a belt to make sure that it's tracking properly. Now, of course, we adjust all this at the factory, but it's always good just to give it a quick test to see that the belt is tracking. We can close that cover back up. And now we can turn on the machine. Everything sounds normal. We can move on to the next step of installing the blade fences. Now we can install the blade fences. They are the steel bars that you have in your package of parts. There are 3 of them. And you will have 6 plastic knobs. Now we'll install the first fence up front here. All of the fences are identical, but you'll have to match up which holes for which pair of slots. So here's the front fence, and that one needs to go this way. Now the holes line up, and I can bring up the knob and thread that in, and then do the same to the other one. And I'll repeat that for the other 2. There are 2 rear fences and 1 front fence. The 2 holes that are closer together are for the rear fence. Now the fences are all loosely installed. These will be used to set the pitch and depth of the tooth for the hedge trimmer blade you are sharpening, so that you have a place to bump up against to ensure you're always getting the right pitch to the tooth and depth of each tooth so it's consistent every time. The blade cutting edge angle is controlled by the fixed position of the belt and the belt backer guide at 45 degrees. Now we're at the point of, if you only purchased a MAG-6000 and you assembled the unit on a workbench or table, you're ready to move on to the use videos, how to set the fences, so on and so forth. If you purchased your machine with a dust collector, we will now install the inlet for the dust collector and hang it on the stand if that's the system you purchased. So for the port install for the dust collector, you'll need to remove this cover, which again is the 5/16 socket. We'll set that cover aside, and now you have your 4-inch inlet. So now we have the inlet installed. You no longer need this cover. Now we'll take our 4-inch diameter hose, fit that to the inlet on the dust collector, and fit that to the inlet on the machine itself. The plug for the dust collector will plug into the outlet underneath the tabletop or underneath this electrical box. Now you can control your dust collector with the blue switch cover. We know it has power because the light functions. And now the switch for the dust collector will have to be left in the on position. Then we can control it with the blue switch cover. This way it's very convenient to be able to turn the dust collector on and off and the machine on and off all at one location. This concludes the assembly, setup, and testing video for the MAG-6000 Hedge Trimmer Blade Sharpener. But one last little final touch, that T15 Torx wrench that we included with the machine that you'll need for removing the small tabletop when changing an abrasive belt fits nicely in this hole that we made in the back so that the tool stays on board with the machine when you have to remove this tabletop. If you have any questions whatsoever, please give us a call at 800-328-1110 if you need some assistance or just some extra help getting your unit assembled. Otherwise, we will make timestamps for all the steps of this assembly. I thank you very much for watching. Thank you for being a customer.